In 2013, the actions taken by a single American man, subcontracted to work for the American National Security Agency, place under the national microscope issues of government surveillance and privacy. Today, the debate over issues of government spying and citizens' rights to privacy issues continues as it has since the first years of American society. From the formative years of the nation to J. Edgar Hoover and the Red Scare, through the devastating terrorist attacks on 9/11 and the Patriot Act, all the way to the actions taken by Edward Snowden and the government's response, the issues over the role of government in protecting citizens has been ever present, raising questions regarding whether privacy is a right or a privilege, what the government's role is, where the line between protection and invasion is drawn, and what the future of the government's surveillance may hold in an ever more technological world.
The signing of the Constitution in 1788 and the ratification of its accompanying Bill of Rights in 1791 marked the official establishment of legislation concerning government interference into the private lives of its citizens. These guidelines were established to protect American citizens while ensuring that intrusive actions, such as demanding the rooming and boarding of soldiers, no longer occurred. Most significant to the discussion of government surveillance is the Fourth Amendment, which states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This amendment remains one of the most controversial and contested portions of the Constitution, and has been tested numerous times throughout the tumultuous history of government surveillance in the U.S.
However, the citizens of the nation question not only the rights guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment, but also to what extent the government's responsibility to protect extended. Agencies like the FBI and CIA became the center of discussion of the role of government. The poster child for this controversy became a man born and raised at the center of the nation's government in Washington, D.C. J. Edgar Hoover became a part of the Department of Justice in 1917. In the span of 2 years, he had risen to the position of Special Assistant to Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. During the so-called Red Scare of 1919 to 1920, Hoover aided Mitchell in the creation of an index card system that kept tabs on every radical leader, organization, and publication in the United States. By 1921, the system held over 450,000 names and had led to the arrest of over 10,000 suspected communists. The arrests were aptly named the Palmer Raids, and with the threat of being blacklisted in Hollywood and beyond, the public began to wonder who would be targeted next. In 1924, Hoover, emerging untouched by the criticism that Palmer had received, was appointed the first director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
May I emphasize that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is as close to you as your nearest telephone. It belongs to you. It seeks to be your protector in all matters within its jurisdiction.
The second Red Scare took place from 1947 through the 1950s. Once again, Hoover and the FBI, along with the newcomer to the scene, Senator Joseph McCarthy, cracked down on perceived communism in the United States.
Frankly, McCarthyism means calling a man a communist who is later proven to be one.
Now, I'd like to just...
In the midst of this new Red Scare in 1950, President Harry Truman, realizing following World War II the importance of breaking German and Japanese codes, ordered the establishment of the National Security Agency. Meanwhile, controversial actions taken by J. Edgar Hoover during the FBI's investigation of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1955 renewed old fears about government involvement in citizens' lives, raising the external question of how far government's role in protection and surveillance extends.
Amidst new tensions and confusing questions about government's role, the ruling of the Supreme Court in the case of Katz v. United States brought to the forefront constitutional rights. The case involved petitioner Charles Katz, who used a public payphone to transmit illegal gambling wagers. The FBI recorded his conversations via an electronic eavesdropping device attached to the exterior of the phone booth, and convicted Katz based on the recordings. Unlike in the earlier case of Olmstead v. United States, the court ruled in favor of the petitioner in a 7-1 vote, officially overturning the earlier precedent by claiming that the Fourth Amendment does protect non-tangible possessions, such as phone calls and electronic transmissions, as well as the reasonable expectation of privacy in places like homes, offices, and telephone booths. Rather than answering questions, however, the ruling only served to create more, especially concerning the definition of reasonable expectation of privacy. It seemed, however, that it would take the unthinkable, another Red Scare or some new revelation, before the Fourth Amendment would once again be tested and questions answered.
On September 11, 2001, the unthinkable happened.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
The United States of America, an international superpower, was brought to its knees by a terrorist attack on American soil. In an effort to ensure that a tragedy never struck so close to home again, Congress, led by Republican Representative Jim Sensenbrenner, introduced H.R. 3162, which would later become known as the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. The act passed through both the Senate and House easily, with votes of 357 to 66 and 98 to 1 respectively. The act, which was signed into law by President George W. Bush and christened as the USA Patriot Act, consists of 10 titles concerning the funding of counterterrorism activities, removal of obstacle in the investigation of terrorism, increase in sharing of critical information between agencies, and improved surveillance procedures and intelligence. To many Americans, the Patriot Act seemed like a scene out of Orwell's 1984, in which the government acts as the big brother. But in a time of instability, fear, and increased nationalism, the Patriot Act garnered support not only in Congress, but also in the general American population. Since 2001, however, public opinion has shifted greatly, and many Americans now question whether the Patriot Act is both constitutional and ethical. The question Americans face now concerned where the line between protection and invasion of privacy was drawn. These suspicions, and general distaste for the Patriot Act, were only multiplied by the war on terror and the actions of
Edward Snowden's
interview. Edward Snowden's
Mr. Snowden and former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden.
Edward Snowden was born in North Carolina in 1983. He worked for the National Security Agency through subcontractor Booz Allen in the NSA's Oahu office. While working there, he began to collect information regarding NSA domestic surveillance practices. Having illegally collected the data, Snowden fled to Hong Kong, where he sold the information to news agencies, who in turn printed the documents that he had leaked. The leak contained sensitive government information and revealed the shocking extent of the U.S. government's surveillance of its own citizens. For many Americans, this revelation about the extent to which the government was interfering in their own lives was enough to name Snowden a hero. Still, others argued that the actions taken by the NSA were in the name of preventing terrorism on U.S. soil and monitoring foreign threats.
Well, he's not a patriot. And he's not.
He thinks he is because he's exposing.
And he's not a whistleblower. He's a fugitive. He's arguably a traitor. He's been charged with a criminal complaint under the Espionage Act, and now, in my view, he's giving aid and comfort to China, to Russia, to Cuba, to Ecuador, to Venezuela, wherever he decides to go on this magical mystery tour of America bashing.
Today, Snowden remains in Russia, with the U.S. government working on extradition while the citizens of America debate over whether he is a hero or traitor. No matter the outcome of his extradition, the information exposed by Edward Snowden has forever changed the way that Americans perceive the government and the Department of Defense. The question now becomes, what does the future hold? In an ever more technologically advanced world, what new abilities will the NSA have, and how will they use them?
The controversy over government surveillance has existed since the establishment of the United States of America. It has been well defined, with strong arguments for and against. However, the questions it raises are blurry and not easily answered. Questions about whether privacy is a right or a privilege, how far the government's responsibility to protect extends, where the line between protection and invasion of privacy exists, and what the future of government surveillance holds will probably all go unanswered. But, as conversation over the topic continues,
we have to make some important decisions about how to protect ourselves and sustain our leadership in the world while upholding the civil liberties and privacy protections that our ideals and our Constitution require.
We each have the ability to formulate our own opinion. How do you feel about Big Brother?